Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see on the thumbnail, what if Issei was never resurrected? Before I start, please hit the subscribe button and like the video. Also share this video with your friends. Let's start the video. The small group of fallen angels was still standing at the edge of the roof of the abandoned church building. To say that these three, Rainer, the beaten-up Calawarner and the new arrival Gariel were in a complicated situation would be an understatement. For one, there was the state Calawarner was in, and even more who she said was responsible for it, Issei Hyodo, a boy who should be dead. He can't be alive, Rainer thought. It was impossible. The wound she caused him was deadly, she was sure of it, and she already sensed his life force fleeing his body when she left him. But now not only one but two people told her that there was a sacred gear user here, calling himself by that name. Was this really Issei? She asked herself. Or someone or something else. A trick maybe, a ruse. But why? Her first thought would have been, of course, that the devils had somehow gotten a hold of him and reincarnated him. That was the original reason why she had gone through such lengths to get close to him, to lure him to a remote place where they would be alone, far away from them. But both Calawarner and the newcomer had confirmed that this was definitely not the case. And two fallen angels would of course recognize a devil when they saw one. So how was he brought back? If it was really him, of course. The picture of a young boy came to her mind, the same boy who she went on a date with the purpose to kill him. One who in his clumsy way tried to give her a good time, appreciated her, cared for her, tried to make her happy. She pushed the thought down instantly. What the hell was she thinking about? Damn it. She didn't need affection from some human brat, and least of all one who spent a good part of his time staring at her breasts and wished nothing more than to grab and fondle them. To her shame, Rainer realized that for a short moment her body is feeling hot at the thought. But, somehow, she just couldn't help it. She of course knew perfectly well about Issei's perverted nature, and she admitted, a small part of her was actually impressed that he had kept it in check so well around her. Not that it mattered at all. Why did it all have to come back to this? She asked herself. Issei Hyodo was a potential dangerous threat to them, even Lord Azazel believed so. That was why he had sent her to observe him. And as long as she had to spend her time watching over him, she could not concentrate on her scheme involving Asia. Issei had been in her way and a danger to them. His feelings, or even her own, on the matter were not important. She did what she had to do. Rainer had thought she let this matter behind her once and for all. She felt anger rising up in her. In opposite to what one could think, it didn't anger her that he might still be alive. Or even that he was interfering with her plan. No, it angered her that she had done all that in vain. That she went that far, to seduce and murder him, that she had pushed herself to do that, and then it was all for nothing. It was like a slap in the face. Right in this moment, however, they had other things to deal with. One of them was standing directly in front of them. Namely the fallen angel who was not part of their group, who was standing right in front of her right now, and that could mean problems. You are working for Azazel-sama, you said. Rainer addressed her. Yes, I do, Gariel replied. And it seems you have some problems here, she commented, looking at Calawarner. Gariel knew this part of her story could cause trouble, if this Rainer or Yuma should come to the idea to contact the fallen angel leaders and ask for confirmation. She already had a telepathic conversation with the boss about this part of their plan, and he had promised her to contact the Azazel of this world to give her some backup for the deception. Like you are one to talk, Calawarner called out. Rainer. She had just left Asia Argento behind, with that boy. She had not even tried to get her back with us. Don't blame me for your failures, Gariel retorted. You were already beaten when I stepped in. I only interfered to save you. And by the way, as I recall, that girl was completely willing to come with you peacefully, until you had to make senseless threats to the boy and start a fight. Who was that girl anyway, and why are you so interested in her? She asked. Asia Argento. Isn't this the name of a sacred gear user I have heard of? She questioned. But last I heard she wasn't supposed to be anywhere in this country, wasn't she? Gariel had a knowing smile on her face as she looked at the other two. When there had ever been a moment when Rainer wanted to strangle her old friend, it was now. Why in the world could Calawarner not simply have kept her mouth shut? But no, She just had to blat out Asia's name in front of someone who was not supposed to know she was here. No, until a short time ago she wasn't, Rainer admitted. She had been sent to us recently. Interesting. I admit I haven't known about this, Gariel stated. Who exactly had authorized to bring her here, if you allow me to ask? Kokubile-sama did. Rainer answered this part without hesitation. Since you are working directly for Lord Azazel, you have possibly not heard about it, she suggested. So Kokubile you say? She questioned. The same smile was still on her face. Rainer, she said to her in a friendly but demeaning manner, cut the crap. You don't need to tell me what you are doing here. I have already a good idea. Do you think I have not heard the talk under the troops about the ideas to take sacred gears from their users? And I also know how precious especially the twilight healing would be for our kind. What exactly are you suggesting here? Rainer asked her, playing dumb. It is quite simply, she stated. About your plan. I want in. This statement clearly surprised the other fallen angels. What? I thought you are working for Azazel. Kalawarner questioned. Azazel-sama knows the worth of the twilight healing for our race just as well as any of us, Gariel responded with a stern look. But he is caught in the politics with the other factions and as our leader he has to hold up, certain moral standards, even if the rest of us do not. That is why he can't openly approve. But we all know he will thank us later if we secure the twilight healing for our kind. You mean if there is an us? Rainer countered. But I guess we have not much choice here, she commented. If you don't want me to tell Azazel what you are doing, not much, no, Gariel pointed out. Okay. Rainer gave in. Come with me. I will introduce you to the others. She invited her inside with a gesture. But then she stopped her in the movement. But let me make one thing clear, she stated. The one who carries the twilight healing will be me. Something about her expression was different from a moment before. It was stern and deadly serious. For some reason this matter seemed really important for her. I have no problem with that, Gariel replied. There are other sacred gears. Many of them might suit me better. My real interests are actually somewhere else, she said. The other one called Kalawarner had already gone inside. Good. Some things are better being said under four eyes. What I truly want, Gariel told her, is to actually watch the extraction ceremony of the sacred gear itself. This actually seemed to surprise Rainer. And why? She responded. You should know that my group has for some time been experimenting on the principles of the workings and use sacred gears. And we have also been researching more effective and safer ways to remove them if the need should ever come up. Really? She stated dryly, but now sounding somewhat interested. Of course, since sacred gear users are rare, we have only seldom the chance to study on the living subject. To actually see and watch over the extraction procedure is a chance I wouldn't miss. To be honest, I would like to assist you. Oh, it seems we have gotten ourselves an expert here, Rainer responded. She did not even try to hide the sarcasm in her voice. Be honest, Rainer, Gariel countered. Tell me, have you ever removed a sacred gear before? She asked. Do you know the risk of it going wrong and losing both the user and the object? The other fallen didn't respond. But the short, barely recognizable, flinch on her face was telling enough to Gariel. As I thought. Seriously, I would have been surprised if you had. She stated, and slightly worried. After all, such a sacred gear extraction is not something you would do every day, right? I know more about the process than you will probably ever do. I have actually participated in it before. You can use my help. Rainer now looked as if she at least seriously considered her words. We can talk about it later, Gariel offered. First introduce me to the rest of our team. XXXXXXX at the same time Asia, who was still beside Issei, was now at the other side of the town. They had tried to get as much distance between the park and them as possible. Now Issei faced another problem, and that was one simple question: where to go with her now? She had still no place to stay. That and people were after her. Their last conversation with Gariel was now over an hour ago. She had told him that this would be probably their best chance to do it and gave him some last instructions. That included one last telepathic transfer of knowledge. It, in this case, meant her idea to infiltrate Yuma's group. Sadly, they didn't have much time to talk and couldn't make a concrete plan where to hide Asia. Still, the chance was too good to pass up, and so she said that she would leave this to him. To him, he thought. Great decision, Gariel, he thought sarcastically. As if he had any idea what to do. The easiest idea would be to bring her home, tell his parents about her situation. The part about having no place to sleep for this night, of course, not the one about the fallen angels chasing her, and ask them if she can stay at their house for the night. But the problem here was that Yuma knew where he lived. If they were searching for her, it would obviously be one of the first places they would look. Think, Issei, think, he told himself. But nothing came to his mind. He knew he wasn't the brightest sometimes, but right now he cursed his lack of imagination. Where could he bring her? Asking Rias Grimori for help was completely out of question. As a high-ranked devil, she would never simply give shelter to a member of the other factions. Even Issei knew that. And with their latest confrontation, the chances were even worse. If he could offer something in exchange, then maybe. But what? Who else? Matsuda or Motohama? No, they would probably try to molest poor Asia as soon as they saw her. But they still seemed to be the safest bet. Maybe if he would stay as well, he could keep them under control. Yes, maybe. But then another thought came to him. Yuma, no, Rainer, had, as he had been told, been observing him for some time. Who said that she didn't know where they lived as well? If she had been watching him, this was actually more than likely. What should he do? Gariel had also informed Asia about what the Guardians believed the fallen angel group had planned for her. Taking her sacred gear, that would cause her death. They would be killing her. Asia herself accepted her words with a sad expression, and to Issei's shock, something that seemed to be resignation. It was nearly as if she was not even surprised about the revelation that the people who took her in after her excommunication from the church were planning to kill her. But she had also eagerly accepted their offer to stay with them for the time being, or better said, to stay with Issei, who was her first and only friend, the person who meant most to her. XXX, a part of Issei was burning in rage that Yuma would actually consider doing something like that to Asia. Of course, she had already killed him before. So he should have a good idea what she is capable of. But Asia, someone so innocent. But he also remembered the other things Gariel had told him. That it was dangerous to let your feelings, especially your anger, overcome you and affect your judgment. You are getting a tunnel vision and can only see the evil that is right in front of you, as she had explained to him. This was not their way. If he decided that he wanted to remain with the Guardians, he would have to overcome that impulse. Yes, Asia was his friend. Yes, she was a kindhearted and probably the most innocent person he knew. But he couldn't expect the fallen angels to know her personally and value her like he did. Just because he cared about her didn't make the fallen angels planning to kill her automatically worse, as if they did it to any other innocent person. He needed to get over himself here. That was at least how she said it to him. But Gariel had also told him that she would do something to keep Asia safe, that she would try to keep Rainer from doing it. Could that really work? He asked himself. Or was it too much asked for? XXX Issei had by now made up his mind. He had decided to bring Asia to his home after all. What other choice did he have? They would ask his parents if she could stay for the night. And when Asia told them her story, how he had found her walking through the town without any idea where to go to, they would hardly say no. At least his home was warded. That and at least some protection from anyone just teleporting inside. If any of the fallen angels showed up, he would just have to defend her and do everything that his parents wouldn't get in the crossfire. He hated to get them involved into this. But now that both the devils and the fallen knew that he was still alive, this would probably happen anyway. Suddenly he felt a sharp pain in his head. Issei, are you all right? Asia asked him, worried. It is okay, he said. He knew that he wasn't sounding too convincing. Partner, Diedrag spoke to him, it seems you are not feeling well. You can say that. This headache. He spoke mentally. That is probably the result of having too much knowledge placed into your mind in a short time, the dragon replied. You mean this is because of what Gariel did? Issei questioned. This is maybe part of it. Diedrag stated. But to be honest, without it you would probably feeling even worse right now. The real problem is still that you have two different sources of power that don't interact well with each other. The information this angel had placed into your mind is actually the only thing that allows you to control them so far. I thought that problem was solved. It was stabilized for the moment. But the powers you are developing are just too strong and they are growing uncontrollable. I will tell it to you plainly. Something strange is going on. What do you mean by that? Issei asked a bit confused. To put it simply, your powers are not working like they are meant to. You remember the incident during your talk with those devils, as your sacred gear suddenly activated. Of course I remember, he replied, not really wanting to talk about this topic. It wasn't supposed to work like this. It gave you multiple power boosts at the same time. My boosted gear isn't supposed to work like that, unless you have reached the level called balance breaker. Isn't that a good thing? Issei asked sheepishly. He could literally hear the dragon growling as he shouted the answer into his head. It would be, if that was the end of it. But beside that there are also other things. For example, that we are even talking with each other, despite that you shouldn't have that ability yet. Or that you were able to understand a new language within a few seconds, despite having no devil or fallen angel magic. Or the fact that I have beaten a devil and a fallen angel after less than 2 days of training, Issei stated with more than just some measure of pride. Don't let this get to your head, partner. They were caught off guard and underestimated you. The next time will be harder. Not that they know what you are capable of. Diedrag pointed out. But that isn't what I am talking about. It seems that your two powers are mixing together, influencing each other, with unpredictable results. And not only that, they are developing in an incredible rate. As far as I can tell you are growing stronger every day, maybe even every hour. And how again is that not a good thing? Issei asked him. I have 2 theories how this might turn out in the end, the dragon explained to him. The first is, you will turn into a being of incredible power and abilities, a god if you want. Really? Cool. And the other? He wanted to know. You will sooner or later lose control and destroy yourself. Diedrag stated. And probably everyone around you, he added. What? Issei called out. He spoke this loud, so that Asia, who was still standing close by, looked at him worried. Issei? She asked concerned. I am okay, he answered. No, he was not, he thought silently. Calm down, partner. That is exactly what we are working on now, to prevent that from happening. To make that clear, your training is not simply about getting stronger. It is about controlling the powers you are developing and prevent that from happening. The headaches came back, in fact they were getting worse and Issei was holding his head. But this time it was not only them. He suddenly felt confused and disoriented. Issei stumbled forward. He heard Asia calling out to him one last time. Then he could no longer see her. Issei saw that he was no longer with her. The abandoned church at the inside, the others were waiting for them. Besides Calawarner, there were 2 more fallen angels that she had not seen before. One of them was a man in a trenchcoat, the other a very young-looking blonde-haired girl in a gothic Lolita outfit. These are Danasik, Rainer introduced them, pointing at the man, and Mittelt. She gestured to the girl. And who is this? The man called Danasik asked, looking at the new fallen they didn't know. This is Gariel. She was sent here by Lord Azazel, Rainer said, hoping that the others would get the hint. She has decided to join our operation. So one more, eh? He commented dryly. That's okay with me, as long as we get the job done. Hey, Mittelt greeted her and gave her a friendly wink with her hand along with a bright smile. She actually sounded a bit like a little girl. Somehow the gesture felt in Gariel's opinion just as much creepy as it was cute. There was however another person present at the other side of the room, leaning with his back against the wall. This one wasn't a fallen angel. No, he was human, a young man with light blonde, nearly white hair, dressed in clothes of cleric origins. He was wearing a long dark blue coat with gold-colored sleeves over plain-looking light gray shirt and trousers. Around his neck was the typical collar of a priest. But his appearance was not the actually unusual thing about him. The corrupted form of power that was radiating from him and the few psychic impressions she was able to get from his well-shielded mind, were more sinister than of any of the fallen angels here. This man was clearly an exorcist. But a very twisted and insane version of one. This is Fried Selzen, formerly of the Catholic Church, Rainer introduced him. I guess you have heard the name before. She indeed did. One of the most infamous stray exorcists in this world. As he was still part of the church, he was said to be a genius, one of the most talented exorcists of his generation. He had been efficient and brutal. More brutal than efficient actually. Stray exorcists were former priests who had been excommunicated. In Fried Selzen's case, because of his cruel methods and because it became more and more clear that his motives were pure sadism and the wish to kill than faith in God. He was not the only one. On their way here she had introduced a few others, obviously also stray exorcists. There had to be an entire group of them here. Nice to meet you, Fried Selzen said to her. Likewise, she responded. She did not even try to sound convincing. It was obvious to her on the first look that the other fallen angels around didn't like this guy any more than she did. The girl angel named Mittelt was looking at him with discomfort. Rainer on the other hand did it with nearly open rage. So you have decided to join the team, right? Fried remarked. Have you made sure that she can be trusted, Rainer? You are hardly one to talk here, Selzen. It was your job to bring the girl here. Instead you let her travel alone and now we have lost her, she accused him. It was told to me that I was her bodyguard, not a babysitter, he retorted, not sounding concerned at all, as if all of this was not truly his business. It is not my fault that the little bitch was too stupid to find her way here. Being around her the entire time would have only drawn attention and I had other things to do. These other things, Rainer remarked, did not happen to involve some random killing or torturing, did it? Well, now that you mention it, he said with a grin. Oh, calm down. We will just all go out and find her. How difficult can that be? She is not alone, Warner pointed out. Someone, a sacred gear user, is helping her. Even better, Fried replied. The sadistic smile on his face only deepened. So we can kill this guy. Finally, the chance for some real fun. For a split second, Rainer had the irrational urge to stop him, but only for a moment. Warner will tell you now everything she had seen and then we will search the entire town and find her, she announced. XXXXXXX outside. A few minutes later most of the fallen angels and also Fried Selzen were already gone. The rest of the exorcists would stay behind as guards. Only 2 fallen angels were still present. At least for the moment. They too would join the search in a few minutes. But before that they still had something to discuss. Rainer, Gariel said. The woman she had just addressed turned around to her. Oh yes, you offered to assist me in the procedure. But you have to admit. You suddenly show up here out of nowhere and offer me help that would improve my chances to success. You understand that this sounds a little bit unlikely. Do you really just want to watch the process? Is this your only motivation? This reaction didn't surprise her. It matched perfectly with her impression of this woman, paranoid and distrustful, but also very passionate and determined to the cause of the fallen angels, and also to her own goals. But it was the sort of determination that could drive someone to kill. This plan here proved that all too well. She claimed loyalty to the fallen angel leaders, especially Azazel, who she seemed to admire. But she was willing to do this here behind his back. Lying behind all that seemed to be a very deep-rooted and overwhelming craving for attention and especially affection. The leather outfit Rainer was wearing certainly matched with that idea. If this girl wasn't crying for attention, she didn't know what it was. In some sense she was a living contradiction. Gariel could only hope that the positive aspects of her personality would win out this time. That would make everything much easier. I admit there is something else, she said. I of course want a sacred gear for myself, a powerful one. But it doesn't have to be twilight healing. If you allow me the question, why do you even want this one gear so much? I have my own reasons, she stated. Of course, Gariel replied casually. Rainer, tell me one thing. If I would tell you that there was a way to remove the sacred gear, but let the girl live, what would you say? For a few moments, Rainer didn't say anything. But her surprise was obvious, even if she did her best to hide it. I guess you are talking about one of this new more effective methods you have been talking about, she questioned then. Why should I trust you on this? The method works, Gariel responded. We already had removed one sacred gear, successfully. At the wish of the owner himself who wanted to get rid of it. But that was already some time ago. Oh yes. Which sacred gear was that? Raynor asked distrustful. Nose Gate, she answered. You have heard of it. She indeed had. It was a well-known sacred gear. One that the last user had disappeared several years ago and that then suddenly showed up again, in the hands of a new owner, only a short time later, one who had already been a young man. What should be impossible, since sacred gears were only reincarnated into newborns, unless. You shouldn't think that I am sentimental, Gariel continued speaking. You know none of us are. But if you had the option to either kill this girl to get the sacred gear or not to kill her with the same result, what would you do? For some reason, for a short moment, Issei's face was flashing in Raynor's mind. Gariel on the other side was silently cheering in triumph at the inside. A small telepathic suggestion, when Raynor's mental defenses were already weakened, and she knew she had her XXXXXXX somewhere else as Issei was able to see again, he nearly fell into panic. Wherever he was clearly not in the place he had been a moment before. In fact, he was clearly not even in Kuo anymore. No, this was a much larger town. He could make out skyscrapers and other large buildings that were extending till the horizon. How in the world did he get here? Was this what Diedrag had been worried about? Had his powers suddenly activated and sent him here? Wherever this here was. Asia. He realized that she was no longer with him. But then, as he really took in his surroundings, he saw that this was probably for the best. He was standing in the middle of a battlefield. The town, he recognized some of his surroundings, he remembered seeing some of the buildings in the distance on TV. It was Tokyo. How in the world did he suddenly come from Kuo to the Japanese capital? But it was not simply any battle that was going on around here. What he was seeing was just unbelievable. This was a fight between supernatural beings, two groups that were clashing with each other. And there was something else. He actually understood everything that was going on around him, when it was clear to him that he shouldn't understand anything at all. At one side he saw two men fighting each other with swords. Both of them were making movements faster than any normal person could see. But that was the least unusual thing here. And not every one of them was human. He saw one bizarre being with large claws and a face that only consisted of white eyes and sharp teeth, like a cross between a reptile and a fish. There was a woman with the ears and the tail of a cat. She was a Nekomata. But Issei wasn't even aware how he knew this detail. He noticed a figure standing under them he knew all too well. The same man who had resurrected him, the man calling himself Darien. Instead of the unremarkable gray suit he had seen him in the last time, he was now wearing a futuristic-looking sort of armor. Issei realized who this people had to be. A group of members of the Guardians, and the other one were their mysterious enemies. He tried to call out to them, but they didn't seem to hear him. They didn't even react. Next to Darien was standing a tall man in a red coat with shoulder-long dark hair. At a closer look Issei saw that his eyes were glowing bright red and his canines were long and sharp. Spreading from his body was a black substance, or maybe it was a form of energy that he controlled, that was flowing from him like a living shadow and reforming itself into different shapes, like spears, blades or tentacles, that were attacking his enemies for him. As he moved one hand, a wave of fire appeared out of nowhere and burned a couple of warriors who were standing against him to ash. But this, Issei knew, was only the slightest fraction of this man's power. If he wanted he could have devastated this planet with one move. He was one of the strongest under the Guardians. But Issei didn't know how he knew this. In opposite to Darien, fighting him, stood a tall young man with black hair. He was wearing a similar sort of armor, only his was colored black instead of light gray like his opponent. Like Darien he was looking like a regular human. But he was a being of cosmic powers, rivaling the strongest beings Issei's universe knew of. As the powers of these two beings clashed, the space around them itself was bending to their will. They were sending fire, ice, pure energy and other elements at each other. They were moving large objects with the help of telekinesis and threw them at each other. At one point of the fight they were multiplying their bodies into nearly a dozen copies, each fighting in a different way. At another Darien's opponent created a black hole that could have ripped the planet apart. But Darien dissolved it before it caused any damage. And both of them were doing other things that Issei was not even able to describe. Issei knew at some level that these entities, there was no other way to call them, were actually using a part of their power to keep the planet from breaking apart under the energy they unleashed. Still, the outfall was terrible. The earth was shaking. Entire lines of houses were crumbling around them. In some distance, Issei saw how a man was being thrown into a building. To his surprise, however, he didn't break through the walls, he just passed through them without actually touching them, like a ghost. It reminded him of something that happened during his training with Gariel. He managed to land a hit, but his sword just passed through her body without actually touching it. Phasing. She had called this technique. Simply put, she was transferring the mass of her body out of this dimension for a short moment. She had, however, admitted that she could do it only for a second. This guy here was clearly much better in it than her. The whole battle was a single show of madness. Both sides were using supernatural attack at each other. Fighters were teleporting from one end of the town to the other. The entire district of the town was standing in flames. Was this the war Darian and Gariel had told him about? And then suddenly everything was over. XXXXXXX. A second later, Issei found himself back where he had been before. Issei. He heard Asia's voice. Issei. He realized that was again standing right next to him. Asia. He said. Yes. Issei, you can hear me. What is with you? The nun asked him. And don't tell me you are okay. You are clearly not. Asia. I was suddenly gone. Yes, you were. You were just standing there, not moving or saying anything for nearly a minute, she told him. What? I was not longer here. I was. He realized the full implications of what she was saying. You say I was actually standing here the entire time? Yes. You were indeed, partner. Diedrag told him. You have not moved 1 meter, except in your mind. What happened? Issei asked him. I believe what you have just experienced was a memory that had manifested itself in your brain, a vision if you want to call it that. You mean, nothing what I have just seen was real? Oh, it certainly happened. To that fallen angel Gariel, or maybe to someone who had once passed this memory to her like she did to you. I guess this is simply another side effect of the continued telepathic transfers. But the last time Gariel did that was already a few hours ago, Issei countered. Your brain probably just needed some time to process all that information. Then that happened, the memory was replaying itself inside your mind. A memory. When did this happen? Issei asked himself. If Tokyo had been devastated like that at one point, everyone would know it. But nobody here did, because this hadn't been their Tokyo, he realized. That battle happened in another universe. I see, he replied. Issei. He heard someone calling to him. As he turned around, he saw Gariel, who was flying above them and was just gliding down to land next to them. You are back, he said. Yes, and I had success, she stated. You mean? Yes, your girlfriend has agreed to my offer. Asia, you can come with me now. She was looking at the nun. Moment. Issei called out. You mean you actually want to go back there with her? Of course, that was the plan. What have you thought? Did you seriously think we two alone could hide her somewhere in the town without causing even more problems? And where would that be? I was just bringing Asia home, he answered. To your house. That is the first place they would look. At least it is warded in. Issei tried to argue. And that would barely hold them back, and your parents would be put in danger as well. That is exactly what we have been talking about. We don't endanger 2 or 3 people to protect one. You are not thinking rationally here. You know what? You are right, I am not thinking rationally when it comes to Asia. I am worried like hell for her. She won't be in any greater danger there as she would be anywhere we could hide her in Kuo, Gariel responded. Rainer has already agreed to my offer to spare her. That means she isn't a direct threat to Asia right now. She will actually make sure that nothing happens to her until I give her that sacred gear. She might actually be safer at the church with me watching her and Rainer not trying to hurt her, than she would be being hunted by the entire group and all those nutjobs with them, and endangering others in the process. Issei said nothing and was just looking downwards. Issei. I will go with her, Asia said to him. She is right, and I don't want to put anyone else in danger. I will protect her, I promise. Gariel told him, and as it looks Rainer might actually helping me doing it, she said smiling. XXXXXXX Issei was now continuing his way home by himself. A part of him could not believe that he had actually agreed to this. He was still a few kilometers away from his house, when he started to hear it, a long obviously painful howling. Not very loud at first, not more when a whisper. But as he moved it was growing louder and louder. Before Issei even fully realized it, he was walking in the direction the noise came from. He arrived in front of a house. The whisper had by now become a loud screaming. Then it suddenly ended. But Issei was sure that it came from inside. He saw then that the door had been broken open. As he stepped inside, he already knew that this was probably not a good idea. But he couldn't help the feeling that someone here needed help. When he entered the living room, he saw that he had been more than right. The walls were splattered with blood. He saw the mutilated dead body of a man, bound to a chair. To his horror, Issei realized that the man was still alive, but unconscious. Issei realized now what had led him here. The pain of this man that he had sensed telepathically. "Oh, look who is here," a voice greeted him. It was a man who was dressed somewhat like a priest, but looked like a maniac, with a gun in one hand and a bloodied sword in the other. This had to be one of this stray exorcists that Gariel had mentioned. It was Fried Selzen. But there was another person in the room. Kaneko. The school uniform of the small devil, that she was still wearing, had been cut apart at several places and Issei could see her bra and her panties through the shredded clothes. Normally this would have excited him, if it weren't for the fact that she was also bleeding from several wounds. "You must be this Issei. The sacred gear user," the exorcist said. "It seems my guess was right that you are somehow connected to the devils," he mused, glancing at Kaneko, and he started to laugh. "I will first deal with your little devil friend here and then you will lead me to Ossia Argento." "Forget it. Whoever you are," Issei shouted, instantly activated his boosted gear. "Issei," Kaneko whispered as she recognized him. Issei wasn't leaving his eyes off the man before him. This guy was clearly one of the exorcists. Probably the one Gariel had especially warned him about. Fried or whatever his name was. Given the state both the devil Kaneko and the man on the chair were in, it was more than rightfully. "I guess I should introduce myself," the exorcist said. "I am Fried Selzen. My job, and my quite personal pleasure, is it to exterminate all devils that cross my path," he declared, "and everyone who associates with them." He grinned. As he said this, he readjusted the gun he held in his left hand, just a little bit, and shot the bounded man in the head. Blood splattered the floor and the wall close by and his body sank down, dead. Issei, who didn't expect a reaction like this, didn't act to stop him in time. "Why did you do that?" he asked. Fried just shrugged with the shoulders, as if this wasn't a serious matter at all and continued to speak as if nothing had happened. As if he had not just killed a bound-up man in cold blood. "This guy had summoned a devil, as you can see here," he pointed to Kaneko with a glare, "and we can't let that happen, can we?" he questioned. "I mean, where will we get when anyone can just summon a devil and get away with it? Maybe even making a deal with them, eh? I mean, these are devils we are talking about, shitty devils. They are like a disease, spreading everywhere, always tempting innocent people to create more of their filthy race. They need to be wiped out. Ideally in the most painful way, of course." He laughed. Issei was looking at the man. Whatever he was, it was clear to him that he was not completely right in the head. After their last confrontation he couldn't say that he was all too about devils either. But this was madness. "You should know that I have nothing to do with the devils," he told him. "Oh yes, that is exactly what a friend of the devils would say," the exorcist replied. "That's how they are. Always lying, cheating and betraying. Killing, maiming, raping, torturing, just like everyone else. But never admitting it. Never being honest about it like us righteous people do, no. Damn it, Issei thought. It was clear that there was truly no reasoning with this guy. Not that he had really intended it from the beginning. But he had hoped he could at least talk him down for some time and maybe give Kaneko a chance to flee. "And that," Fried stated, "means all will have to die. You of course only after you have told me where the girl we are looking for is." He was looking at Issei. "I won't tell you anything, you freak," Issei exclaimed. "Ah, resistance," Fried announced. "You truly are an interesting one, aren't you?" With this words he pointed the gun at him, and fired nearly in the same moment. Issei moved, incredible fast. He managed to actually evade the first volley of 3 shots. Boost. He heard Diedrag's voice in his mind as the boosted gear did its work. Issei remembered his training. But at the same time he was for a short moment, surrendering himself completely to his own power and acted nearly completely on autopilot, on instinct. He also remembered what Diedrag told him a short time ago. That his powers were growing and that he needed training for control. But right now he couldn't bother with control. He needed to survive. And for that he needed speed. Near instantly he reached Fried, after avoiding the first 3 bullets, and landed a hit on his left arm that threw off his aim. But Issei had miscalculated his own speed, moved accidentally past him, lost his footing in the process, stumbled and nearly crashed into the wall behind the mad stray exorcist. Fried was for a split second staring at him, caught between shock and amusement about what had just happened. But only for a short moment. Then he was back to his normal sadistic self. A bit clumsy, aren't we? He commented. Maybe I should cut off your legs so that something like that can't happen to you again. Fried grinned maliciously, and took aim again. I guess that was what Diedrag meant about controlling my own powers, Issei murmured to himself as he was still trying to regain his balance. He moved his left arm just in time to block another one of Fried's bullets with his sacred gear. Like he had learned it, he used his own energy to strengthen his own defenses, like an armor made of his own power. A master of this technique could have stopped the bullets with his bare hands. Sadly, he wasn't one. If he had better control over his other abilities, he could, as he was told, use Drags and his own energies to form a barrier, a shield, around himself, that could stop bullets before they even reached him. But he wasn't yet capable of that either. Maybe he would in the future. But in this moment he had to work with what he could do right now. To that came that Fried's weapons had themselves a certain spiritual energy behind them. Issei could sense it, feel it. They were the weapons of an exorcist after all. It wasn't exactly what one would call holy power. Not anymore at least. Not with what Fried had become. His power was now just as corrupted as his character. I see you are able to use your sacred gear, in more sense than one, the stray exorcist commented dryly. Issei was standing ready, waiting to deflect the next shot. But it didn't come. Fried decided to stop wasting his bullets and lifted his sword instead, taking a fighting stance. Issei ran forward, intending to match him. But he waited a bit longer until he conjured his own sword, hoping to catch him off guard. It was one of the earlier techniques he had learned. The sword, as he had been explained, was placed just a little bit outside of normal space and could be brought here by his command. It worked quite similar as the materialization of his sacred gear, so he could learn it quite easily. Normally such a technique, letting an object vanish and bringing it back, would have been above his current level of skill. But he improvised, with other words, he attempted to send the blade to the same place as the sacred gear, and it worked. As the weapon suddenly appeared in his hand, the stray exorcist indeed seemed surprised and had to readjust his position in the last moment and barely managed to block Issei's attack. He had obviously expected him to use his boosted gear for it like the last time. But the surprise only kept him unbalanced for a short moment and he was now back in the game. He parried the next 2 strikes without any problem. The boosted gear, Issei knew it would continue to power him up. A few more boost and he might be able to take this Fried down by pure strength alone. But he knew his body couldn't take much more and he would most likely collapse before he reached this point, and then he would be helpless. So he deactivated it for the moment. That meant he would need to power up again from the beginning. But this was the lesser risk by far. This was it, Issei thought. This opponent wasn't underestimating him and he wasn't holding back. Whoever this nutjob was, he knew he couldn't win this fight on power and reflexes alone and he didn't have the skill yet to keep up with someone of Fried's caliber. He needed to find a middle ground between both. He needed to or he would be dead. XXXXXXX the abandoned church. At the same time the fallen angel Gariel was just landing, along with Asia who she had brought back with her, outside of the church building. Remember, she said to her with a low voice, try not to act too close with me. That would only make them distrustful. As far as it comes to them I have just found you and dragged you back here. I will not be your protector when we are there, not officially at least. That will be Rainer. A bit ironic, don't you think? Since she is the one who would have killed you otherwise. She said those seemingly cynical words to her. But her voice was warm and she gave her a reassuring smile while doing it. You see, in some sense we are not only helping you, but Rainer as well. We are helping to show her that what she truly wants cannot be achieved with death and violence. I promise I will do everything to keep you safe. But for now you just have to stay quiet and look frightened, she told her. They entered the building. Inside, in the hall they met Rainer, Mittelt and a handful of the stray exorcists. The others were obviously still out somewhere in the town, looking for Asia. But she was already here. You have found her, Rainer exclaimed, sounding, perhaps for the first time since Gariel met her, truly happy. It seems it wasn't a bad idea to add you to our group, she stated. Asia didn't say anything, but she was looking around from one of them to the other, visible fearful. She was playing her role really good, Gariel thought. No, she corrected her own foolishness, it was more than an act. Of course Asia was truly afraid. How could she not in her situation? Rainer was kneeling down right in front of the small nun. I see you are finally here, Asia, she said. You remember me, right? Lord Kokabeel had introduced us shortly some time ago. I am to take care of you from now on. Yes, Rainer Sama, I remember, Asia responded a bit hesitated. You don't need to be afraid. I won't let anything happen to you, the fallen angel assured her. I admit that I want your sacred gear, she downright told her the truth. But you don't need to worry. We have a new method to take it without harming you, she said. That means you won't have to die. Mittelt was looking at them, visible surprised about this statement. But she didn't say anything, at least for the moment. You have gone through so much because of it, Rainer reminded Asia. The sacred gear was the reason you were excommunicated by the church. Tell me, wouldn't you actually be happy to get rid of it? Why don't you give it to me? Rainer asked her with a soft voice. Asia began, not quite knowing what to say. It was clear that Rainer's words were getting to her. I know you liked helping people. But I promise you I will put it to good use when I have it. And you can live a normal life. Don't you want that? Yes, Asia now answered firmly. I don't want to be alone. I want to have friends. You see, I will take the twilight healing from you and we will both be happy, Rainer told her. She had a friendly smile on her face. It nearly seemed genuine. And who knew? Maybe it was. Who said that she didn't actually meant what she said and expected Asia to be happy? Now that it was no longer necessary to kill her. Asia, tell me, I have heard that you have met Issei, Rainer said to her. How is he? Has he said anything? Do you know what he is doing right now? She asked her. Yes, she answered slowly, he found me when I was walking through the town. We talked. He had mentioned you as well, she said, remembering the few times Issei had mentioned the fallen angel. Of course he had. Me and him, we are quite close to each other. You should know. I am his girlfriend, she told her. The smile on her face, if at all, turned even brighter than before. What? This clearly surprised Asia. She could barely keep her voice down. Sure, he had mentioned Rainer, but not like that. She clearly didn't know what to make of this information. Why did she feel so uneasy about this? Tell me, how is he? Rainer asked her. We didn't get to spend much time together in the last days, since I have many important things here to take care of. So tell me, what is he doing right now? Has he told you anything? Asia didn't see the grin on the fallen angel Mittelt's face as she heard her saying this. But Gariel did. He said he wants to protect me. We have become friends. He said he cares about me. He said he will keep me safe at every price, Asia stated. Really? Rainer replied. The snarling tone in her voice was barely heard, but it was noticeable, for someone who paid attention. Well, if you are a friend of my boyfriend, then that means we should be friends as well, right, Asia? The coldness and anger was barely to hear now. But it was still there. Yes, Rainer-sama, thank you, she said happily. She didn't think that the fallen angel truly meant it. But she knew she would be happy to make another friend. Come, I will show you your room, Rainer told her and gestured for the nun to follow her. As they were leaving, the other two fallen were left alone. Mittelt saw no reason to hold herself back. That was just hilarious, don't you think? I knew Rainer was a great liar, but this was just great. She chuckled. What makes you call her a liar? Gariel asked with an obviously played curiosity. If you look closer, you will see that nothing she had just told her was actually untrue. Just out of context, she thought. You are kidding, right? She just told Asia that she is in love with that Hyodo guy. Really? She just told her that she is his girlfriend and that she would really like to know what he is doing right now. This is quite true, isn't it? Mittelt, who finally got it, was now laughing freely. Oh yes, right, it was all completely true, she said, intentionally exaggerating with a smirk, thinking that she saw the irony. You see, the greatest liar is the one who tells you the truth right in your face, Gariel remarked. She let a little bit of her real amusement of the true irony of her statement flowing in as she grinned. The small fallen angel didn't realize that she was the one being fooled, she and the others. It was nice talking to you, Mittelt, she stated. Yeah, see you around, the childlike fallen replied cheerfully as Gariel too left the room. XXXXXXX Issei and Fried Selzen were still crossing swords. After being taken by surprise for a few moments, the stray exorcist was now attacking on his own. Like he had learned, Issei was channeling part of his energy into his weapon. This was, to be honest, probably the only reason he had not been disarmed yet. While the light-based powers of the exorcist's weapons were not very effective against him, since he was not a devil or another demonic being, there was another factor. Fried was simply better than him. His opponent was a skilled swordsman and an experienced fighter, while he was only an amateur with an impressive source of power. He had started to draw strength from the boosted gear again. But he knew his current limit his body could take and that this power boosts alone would probably not be enough. And any wrong move could cost him his life against this opponent. Issei truly cursed his luck for running into this situation. He blocked another strike of the exorcist's sword by letting it hit his sacred gear, while trying to land a hit with his own blade at the same time, that Fried however dodged. He stopped another 2 hits, one with his sword, the other once again with the boosted gear. One of the most powerful sources of power in the world, and you use it like a simple wood shield, Diedrag commented his habit of using his sacred gear to deflect his enemies' blows. When I am able to use it in a better way I will tell you, Issei told him mentally. Until then I need to survive. Okay partner. Diedrag responded. It is clear that you won't beat this opponent in swordsmanship and if you just continue dodging his bullets, he will get you sooner or later. Use another kind of power he is not prepared for. Stop playing his game. Good idea Diedrag, Issei replied. But what should he use? To be honest he wasn't all too proficient in any of this techniques. His telepathy. He remembered. Of course, he thought. It was clearly the power he had shown the greatest talent so far. Issei tried to focus. He intended to send a telepathic attack against his opponent. Similar as he knew now he had done it against Kiba. Only that this time it wasn't a reflex but a conscious choice. The stray exorcist had already raised his weapon again for another strike. If only he had 1 second to concentrate, Issei thought. To his luck his wish was fulfilled a moment later when Kaneko finally took her chance and jumped at the exorcist from behind. Fried, who put a great part of his concentration on his current opponent, only saw her coming in the last moment. But he did saw her. The day when he let a devil like this take him by surprise was the one he would gladly die, he told himself mockingly. He turned his blade around and instead of going against Issei, stepped her in the left shoulder. She cried out loud from the pain the light-based weapon caused her. No you little cunt, he hissed at her, this is not how we are doing it. First I will deal with your pal over there and then I will have some fun with you. But see it from the positive side, at least you won't die a virgin. Issei felt even more sick as he already did before as he heard his words. Sure, he wasn't on good terms with the devils, for obvious reasons. But to do that to Kaneko. By the look of horror on her face she was thinking the same thing. He swore to himself that he would take this guy down here and now. Fried was hit by Issei's mental attack without warning, and for all his training and experience he wasn't prepared for this. As an exorcist he had been schooled to resist mental probing to some level. But what nobody had ever thought of was a telepathic assault right in the middle of a battle. All what Fried could do in this moment was holding his head and screaming in pain. Issei on the other hand saw for a short moment a few glimpses of Fried's memories. What exactly he did to the man on the chair, other of his victims, a scene of him talking to Yuma, Rainer, Asia, another fallen angel, this one looking quite different than the others he had seen, red eyes, long black hair and pale skin. The guy was looking a bit like Dracula, he thought, and heard Diedrag scoffing in the background of his own mind at that. A few other people he didn't recognize. But at the same time he was not wasting this chance. Issei was jumping at his opponent. Boost. The sacred gear was assisting him once again, in more than one way, as Fried had put it. Before the stray exorcist had time to recover and to react, he was hit by Issei's blow. It hit him with enough force to send him flying and leave a visible crack in the wall before them. Issei believed he heard, much to his satisfaction, at least a few of Fried's bones breaking. The exorcist was now lying on the ground, clearly out. But he saw that he was still breathing. Issei sat down, trying to come to breathe again. "Thank you, Issei-senpai," Kaneko said to him. Their personal disagreements seemed to be forgotten for the moment. A short time later a magic circle showed up on the ground in front of them and Rias and the rest of her peerage were appearing in the room. They all were looking in shock from Kaneko and the state she was into Issei, the dead man on the other end of the room and the unconscious stray exorcist. None of them was looking very happy about what they were seeing. Then Kaneko began to explain what happened. XXXXXXX. A few minutes later Gariel was leaving the building. She had left Asia behind for now, in Rainer's care. Yes, it was quite the irony that the one who would have otherwise killed her was now watching over her. But right now Rainer was probably the person most interested in her safety, even if it was mostly for her own self-interest. At least until the ritual. But for that part, Gariel knew she needed a special kind of power, a power she didn't possess. She sends out a mental call. Not to Issei, but to another person she had a telepathic connection with. She sends the call into the void between the realities. Boss. I hope you can hear me. There's something I need you to help me with, she said. Gariel knew in some sense she was just as much a manipulator as many of the people her groups were standing against. She was manipulating Rainer and the others, not quite unlike Rainer had manipulated Issei, there was no denying that. She was using their ambitions for her own agenda. So far she had found out a few interesting things. But she was doing it all for a good cause. She had for example been lying to Rainer about what exactly the ritual would do as well. Yes, it would give her what she wanted, but not exactly in the way Gariel had claimed. She had been falsely claiming to work for Azazel, to be part of the Grigori. And many other things. So what? She thought. If her manipulations kept Rainer from killing an innocent person and maybe, just maybe, even helped to turn her into a better person in the process, then she gladly accepted to be one. For now, it was time to reunite with Issei and tell him about what happened. She concentrated on the telepathic marker that had been placed on him. A circle appeared under her feet and a moment later she had teleported away. XXX as she reappeared moments later, she felt how her jaw dropped. She had expected Issei to be home by now. Or maybe out at training. But not this. The scene before her could have come right out of a horror movie. She was standing inside some house. At the other side of the room was the mutilated body of a man, bound to a chair, who had been killed by an headshot. Issei was standing there, breathing heavily and being visible beaten up. Another body was lying on the ground before her. She recognized him as Fried Selzen, unconscious by what she could say. The entire room was stained with blood. The furniture had been broken. What in the world had happened here? What made it even worse was that some of the devils from Kuo Academy were present. In fact, the entire Grimoire peerage was here. One of them, a white-haired girl, seemed to be injured and her clothes had been partly cut off. Most likely the work of Selzen. They all were standing in opposite to Issei and had their eyes on him. But now with her arrival, their attention turned to her. It seemed the cat was probably out of the bag now when it came to their connection. The devils were looking at her with wariness and in most cases open hostility. No wonder. They could sense what she was after all. Gariel, he called out as he saw her. Great. So much for the last bit of chance at pretending that they had nothing to do with each other, she thought sarcastically. Issei, I think we should plan in another lesson about the entire concept of keeping your mouth shut, especially in front of devils, she remarked. So you have joined the fallen angels, issei, Rias Grimori stated. I hadn't thought you would after the last one tried to kill you. She is not one of that fallen angels, issei replied. Not that this devil had any right to talk here, he thought. She belongs to the same group like me. Is that so? She responded distrustful. He is telling the truth. I am not a member of the Grigori. In fact, I have infiltrated the group residing in the old church building for our own reasons, Gariel told them. Really? Rias asked. Her curiosity was now sparked. And for what purpose? That is our business and not yours, devil, she replied sharply. Rias frowned, but held herself back from saying anything. If the group issei had joined were truly not the Grigori, she at least wanted to avoid a fight with them until she knew more. Gariel, issei said to her, I was able to take a short look into this guy's head. It was only a few glimpses, but I think he might know something important. Her gaze turned to Freed. Yes, having Selzen captured might turn out more than useful. But as things look, they would very likely have to leave his capture to the devils. Not only did they have a very good argument, since he had as it looked nearly killed a member of their peerage. She and issei also had not the time or a place to actually hold Selzen and guard him. Especially not with her still with the fallen angel group in Asia. But the devils had both. As an angel, fallen angel, and a member of the Guardians, she didn't trust a devil as far as. No, scratch that. She had found out that she could throw a devil quite far from personal experience. Well, the point was she didn't trust them. But this opportunity was too good to pass up. Rias Grimori, she finally said, I want to offer you a deal. XXXXXXX Rainer was standing by herself somewhere in the area surrounding the church building. She just wanted some time away from the others. Things were going well again. Ossia Argento was now here, and it was now she would probably not even be trying to leave. But there was still the question of issei, or whoever it was, who was still out there. It was not so important, she thought. As long as he didn't interfere. Asia was the sacred gear user who truly mattered, she told herself. But her time alone was cut short in this moment. Yuma-chan, she heard a well-known voice. Issei. But as Rainer was looking around, she didn't see anybody. Where are you? She called out. Yuma-chan. She heard the voice again, this time it was a bit louder and sounded closer by. As she turned around this time, she actually saw Issei Hyodo standing a few meters before her. So it is really you, she stated. Yes, of course it is me. I am so happy to see you again, he said with obvious sarcasm. Not that she could truly hold it against him. Yuma-chan, or should I rather call you Rainer-chan? It seems you have found out a few things, she remarked. I know a lot, he responded. Issei, tell me, how exactly are you still alive? You are clearly not a devil, just as I have been told, Rainer questioned. There are other people beside them who can bring you back, he answered. Others. It wasn't heaven, was it? No. Then another group. Interesting. Lord Azazel will be very interested in this information. Is that all you care about? He asked her. Anger was now shining through his words. Oh, what's with that tone? Can it be that you are still a bit raw about this whole "killing you" thing? She asked him mockingly. You know, I really cared about you. I had even begun to love you. But what did you do? Rainer said nothing for a few moments before she answered. I took no pleasure in killing you. Like I told you, it was all because of your sacred gear. But I will not hesitate to do it again if you disturb my plans for Asia. In this moment she lunged at him. But she just passed through his body as if it wasn't even there. And it wasn't. Some sort of projection, she realized. Interesting. Issei had to suppress a grin. After the last confrontation with the devils, he, Gariel and Diedrag had gone through another few rounds of training. Telepathic projections were a part of it. And this was a good opportunity to test it out, not to mention to get back a little bit at Yuma. He reappeared behind her and was laying his arms around her. You know, the sad thing is, I can't really fondle your boobs in this form, he told her. Rainer got a deep blush on her face as she noticed where exactly his hands were, and stepped a meter away from him. You have not changed at all, she said. I hope not, he replied grinning. And just that you know. I don't intend to interfere in your plans for Asia, as long as I am sure that no harm will come to her. What's with you and her anyway? Are you already trying to replace me? She taunted him. No. Asia is my friend and I want to protect her from people like you, he replied. Just tell me one thing, he said. Why? Why did you kill me? He asked. The plain truth. Orders. Lord Azazel told me to watch over you, but he also warned me that he feared your sacred gear could go berserk and endanger everything around you, if it got out of control. Then some of my superiors told me that our leaders decided it would be better to get rid of you. That and I could hardly deal with that and with Asia at the same time. So I stopped the problem before it even started, and in some sense protected everyone else, she added as if it was an afterthought. Issei was startled for a moment about this simple explanation. But he was also very uncomfortably reminded of Diedrag's prediction what would happen if his powers got out of control. Stop the problem. He responded. You murdered me. You were planning to kill Asia. That is reason enough for you to kill someone. This is just what happens to sacred gear users. If you don't get used, or killed, by one side, then by the other, she replied coldly. Believe me, I have seen people die for far less reason. We don't live in a very nice world. For a short moment Issei wasn't even sure how he should answer to that. But his anger finally caused him to continue talking. This happens to sacred gear users, you say? Well, it seems fallen angels are not so different, right? I have found out a lot about your kind in the last few days. Let's see. Born into a conflict, devils and normal angels are your enemies, no say in that. You all are part of an organization called the Grigori. You all become part of the war, if you want or not. People around the world hate you just for what you are. Even the ones who never did anything to fall and were just born this way. It seems the sacred gear users are not the only ones who got a crappy deal, right? Tell me, do you really believe that the other fallen angels will suddenly start to love and adore you, just because you have taken a sacred gear from a nun? He asked her. Look at you, the one guy who actually told you that he loved you was the one you stabbed to death. Maybe I should actually feel sorry for you. Shut up. Rainer now yelled at him angrily. Why do you think this sacred gear will give you this, if you didn't do it for Asia? He wanted to know. This is different for a fallen angel, she replied. Really? He asked. Well, we will see. I will leave it to you. Make sure Asia will not be harmed and I won't interfere. With these words he vanished. Rainer was left, still staring at the spot where Issei's thought projection had just been. The plan will work out, she was telling herself. He knew nothing about the three factions except what he might have learned during the last days. Issei. He was alive, she thought. XXX a few miles away, stood Issei's true body, somewhere at a sidewalk in the town. He had just ended the projection and his consciousness had returned. This short confrontation was one of the hardest things he had ever done, he admitted to himself, and that not only because it was difficult to keep up the projection. Sagariel, I hope your plan works out, he said quietly. XXXXXXX abandoned church. The next day the ritual had started. Asia's body was bound to a cross in one of the lower-leveled rooms of the building, hanging in front of the two fallen angels. But otherwise she was okay. She was still awake during the entire process. Before this had started, Gariel had made sure that the way she was hung up didn't cause her any unnecessary pain. Despite that, however, the fear on her face was clearly to see. Gariel had assured her that nothing would happen to her. Still, the entire ritual in itself was frightening. She was truly sorry that she had to put Asia through this. But on the other side, the nun had volunteered to do this. Gariel was performing the improved ritual, while Rainer was standing next to her, waiting to receive the twilight healing. What she didn't know was that all that was mostly facade. Hanging Asia up on a cross, the long preparation, the strict ceremonial procedure, all this was unnecessary. This made Gariel only feel even worse that she was putting Asia through this. But it couldn't be helped. Rainer, and especially everyone else, needed to think that this was only a modified version of the original ritual. In truth, however, Gariel was using a completely different technique. A power that she normally didn't had on her own. She silently thanked Darien for transferring it to her temporarily, for this one task. Mirrored essence, she thought without words as she reached out her hand to Asia's chest. Her mind and her powers concentrating on her life energy and on that was hidden inside it, the sacred gear. Asia cried out, and a second later sank down motionlessly. Just as she had told her to do it earlier, Gariel thought. One moment later she focused her powers once again and redirected them, and the power was gathering in her right hand, until it was taking form, the sacred gear, the twilight healing in the physical manifestation of two bright glowing rings. Then she handed it to Rainer, who was eagerly taking it with a mixture of glee, greed and pure happiness and placed it inside her own chest. The entire body of the fallen angel began to glow in a green-colored light. Yes, yes, it is mine. Finally, I have what I have longed for so long, Rainer exclaimed. Gariel took a side glance at her. She found her fixation of this sacred gear fascinating, she admitted, and on some level disturbing. One thing was clear, it was more than just greed or hunger for power that drove her to this. Then she looked at Asia. She was all right, but she looked tired and her clothes were quite disheveled, in more sense than one. For the ritual she had only been wearing a light nightdress that had seriously slipped out of place. Her left boob was nearly completely hanging out. Issei would have loved to be here in this moment, she thought naughtily. But she pushed the image away right afterwards. She still had some important things to take care of. As I promised you, you have it and Asia is still alive, she addressed Rainer. Now about the rest of our agreement. Don't worry. There is only one last thing I need Asia to do for me. I am keeping my word. Then she can go wherever she wants to and start a new life if she wants. And we will leave everyone else to believe that she died here, despite your efforts, Rainer told her. Then nobody will ever go after her again. Rainer-sama. Thank you, Asia said to her weakly. The fallen angel grimaced a bit at the unexpected words of the nun. Why in the world would she say something like this? She and the other fallen had just put her through this painful procedure and she knew that she had originally planned to take her life. So why? When Asia has recovered enough, tell her to come to me, she said to Gariel. We will be making a little trip, and then, when we return, she will be free. XXXXXXX somewhere in Italy Cardinal Azzetti was sitting behind the desk of the main office of a secret installation of the Catholic Church that he was visiting and waiting for the two people he was here to talk to. Less than a minute later he heard a knock on the door. Please come in, he said in Italian. The two people who walked in were two very young women, not more than schoolgirls actually. But he knew perfectly well that both of them were trained exorcists, and beside that both of them were holy sword wielders. Your Eminence, the first one greeted him, you wanted to talk to us. She was 16, maybe 17 years old and had light brown, nearly orange-colored hair, that she was wearing in twin tails. Her partner was a bit taller than her and had short bluish hair. Yes, Irina Shido and Zenobia Quarta, I am here to inform you that the church has decided to interrupt your current mission, he told them. What? Zenobia said. A small break of discipline, maybe. But he had already been informed that this girl had somewhat of an impulsive strike. An important matter has come up. One that could by our knowledge also help with the task you are currently working on, he stated. We have been informed that Fried Selzen has been captured. At the mention of the infamous stray exorcist, both of the girls knew this was truly important. And the ones who are holding him have offered to hand him over to us, Cardinal Azzetti informed them. I want both of you to travel to Japan and retrieve him. Your Eminence, it may be Fried Selzen, but by what you said he was already overpowered and detained. May I ask why two holy sword users are necessary for this task? Especially since we were already on another important mission, and why you are coming in person to tell us? Zenobia asked him. The place where Selzen was captured is in Devil's territory, the Cardinal answered. To that comes by our information the devils of this area are involved in this. XXXXXXX Grigori headquarters. A few hours after the ritual, Rainer had returned. She was in this moment standing in front of a group of a dozen individuals who were sitting at a long table before her. They were the leaders of the Grigori, the fallen angel state and organization. Asia was standing beside her, proving to everyone that she was still alive, while Rainer demonstrated to all of them that she now possessed the power of the twilight healing. By cutting her wrist and healing it right afterwards. The reaction of her leaders was not quite what she had expected. Kokubile was sitting there, watching silently and looking at her with approval. This surprised her, since he was the one who had brought up the idea of taking Asia's sacred gear in the first place and she had basically screwed him over. If she had expected one of them to be against her, it was him. Barakwile, on the other hand, seemed barely to hold back his hostility. It was clear that he didn't approve of her latest actions in the slightest. Shemhazai said nothing. She didn't know what he was thinking. Penemu seemed to merely looking at her with curiosity. She had expected her return to either be praised and rewarded or to be court-martialed for acting out of orders. She had been more than ready to face either of them if she was honest. But this mild reaction. This was much worse. They were not impressed. Not in the way she had wanted them to. Curiosity, interest, yes, but mostly about the circumstances how she had gotten the twilight healing, not the fact that she had it in the first place. Azazel was just sitting there in silence, looking at her with an calm expression. Only that. The one of them whose attention she had wanted to win most. Issei's words were coming back to her. Do you really believe that the other fallen angels will suddenly start to love and adore you, just because you have taken a sacred gear from a nun? Kuo, the Hyodo home. Issei's parents were having an unexpected visitor. His mother opened after she had heard it ringing at the door. Yes? She asked. To her surprise, she saw that it was a young girl who was standing outside. Hello Mrs. Hyodo, I am going to the same class as Issei. My name is Murayama. I wanted to ask if he is here, the girl asked her. For a split second, Issei's mother was staring at her with an open mouth. The Hyodis were for the most part a quite normal family. One of the few exceptions was that their son was a hopeless pervert, what had made him into an outsider at school. If there was one thing she would have never expected, then it was a girl standing at their door, asking for him. Who is it, darling? Issei's father asked her from the living room. Someone who is asking for Issei, she answered. Is it those boys Matsuda and Motohama? He questioned. They were normally the only ones from his class who usually visited him. No. It's a girl, she replied. What? He was similar surprised as his wife. I am sorry, but Issei is not here in the moment, she told Murayama. Oh, when will he return? I'm not completely sure, she admitted. To be honest, he had not been at home much lately. I see, Murayama responded. Thank you. The truth was, ever since Issei had been suddenly invited by Rias Grimori a few days ago, she had been wondering. During their discussion then, the usually happy-go-lucky pervert she knew had suddenly seemed deeply serious and was even calling them out for the way they acted. She admitted that left an impression on her. As she started to actually pay some attention to him, she realized that something actually seemed to be going on with him. The way he was looking and acting was simply different from before. All of that made her somewhat curious, and, pervert or not, Hyodo was a fellow student. So it couldn't be wrong to be worried. When she asked Matsuda and Motohama, who were of course more interested in staring at her breasts than answering questions, she found out that he, despite being their best friend, spent very little time with them during these last few days. Okay. She admitted she had followed him once or twice after school. Then she had seen him meeting with a woman she had never seen before a few times, and every time he and the woman vanished a short time later. All that seemed even more strange to her. Shall I tell him that you were here when he returns? Issei's mother asked. This isn't necessary. I will just talk to him another time, she answered. If someone had told her a few days ago that she would be following around, not to say stalking, a member of the perverted trio, she wouldn't have believed it. But she couldn't help herself. Something was happening with Hyodo, and she felt that she just had to know what it was. XXXXXXX. If someone had told Issei 1 week ago that he would be walking through the corridors of a seemingly abandoned factory building somewhere at the outskirts of the city, together with Rias Grimori of all people, he would have thought this person was lying. If someone had told him that Rias Grimori and the members of her club were devils and that he and them were together would capture and interrogate an insane priest and serial killer, he would have thought that person was completely out of his mind. Well, in this moment he was walking through said building, together with Rias Grimori and Akano Himahima. As they had told him, the place was officially abandoned. But in truth the place belonged to the Grimori family, as a storage, or in this case a prison for "things that were too dangerous to be kept at the school, like Fried Selzen. They were here to begin the interrogation of the very clearly insane exorcist. Here it is, Rias said to him as she was leading him to a door. He had already seen a room that was filled with various items that were probably connected to devil culture. This one, on the other hand, was outfitted like a prison cell, where the stray exorcist was being. That wasn't even all of it. As hard as it was to top that level of craziness. Beside all that, he was also having a conversation with a dragon, and the topic of their current talk was not exactly usual either. Backquote Dracula. I know there are many strange things out there. But really, Drake. Dracula? Issei questioned. Yes, Dracula. Or Prince Vlad III of Wallachia if you prefer his official title. Drake replied. It was clearly him. The man you have seen in the stray exorcist's memories, however, was, when I remember right, Kokabeel, one of the leaders of the fallen angels. Backquote the same one that Gariel had mentioned as somehow involved with Rainer's group, Issei commented. Yes. He and Drake had been talking in a bit more detail about the vision he had experienced, that showed him a battle that had happened in some alternate reality. What had astonished Issei the most was who exactly one of the people he had seen fighting was. He remembered the man in the red trench coat, with the glowing red eyes, and the long canines. According to Drake, who was connected to his mind and has so seen the vision as well, this guy was nobody else than. Backquote You're telling me that Dracula is a member of the Guardians? You are joking, aren't you? He asked. Backquote Even if he exists, how would he even be on their side? No, partner, I am not. The dragon assured him. One version of him at least. But he was obviously not the one from our world. In his lifetime as a human, he had been one of the most feared rulers and warlords of his race. In secret, however, he was dealing with far greater powers than that. And with his mortal death, he became something different, a so-called Nosferatu, a king of the undead, a vampire of the highest order. But the one from your vision, he was different, far above even that. This one had somehow evolved into a being whose power even surpasses mine. Backquote You actually sound impressed. I am. For a being who started out as human to actually surpass me, not only the power of one of my hosts, but me myself. That is quite impressive. Backquote After all what I have seen, why does that even surprise me? Issei stated. Yes, his life had obviously turned crazy. Backquote Sahi is a member of the Guardians, and that means I am now part of the same group as him. The thought obviously unsettled him. Actually, by what we have seen, he seemed to be one of the higher ranked members of the organization, maybe even one of their leaders. That means if you decide to stay, he will be one of your superiors. Drake told him. Backquote Great. Just what I always wanted, the king of the vampires as my boss, he thought. XXX Issei remembered the scenes he had seen of him in his vision. Aside from Darien and his mysterious opponent, the man in the red trench coat had been the most impressive and, plainly said, most frightening of the warriors he had seen. The power of all three of them was far, far beyond anything he would have thought possible. But ironically, it was not only their supernatural powers. He remembered the details of the fight. If he had thought the two sword fighters he had seen at the beginning of the battle, the skill and speed that Darien, the guy he had been fighting against, and this backquote Dracula, had shown with the blade when they had temporarily used short-range weapons, made them look like amateurs. One thought, however, had crossed his mind. Why would beings like this, whose power surpassed even gods, be this good with simple weapons like swords? As I told you, Vlad Dracula had started out as human. Drake reminded him. It might be the same with the other two. Them. But he remembered how absurdly powerful all three of them were. Would he himself one day also be a being like that? He asked himself. Or would he turn into a killing machine and destroy anyone around him, like Drake and Rainer had suggested? Rainer. Even thinking about her had started to hurt. But if this plan worked out, he might have to do much more than thinking about her. Don't worry, partner. I am sure together we will get this under control. The being who had resurrected you seems quite competent, and if he and the others were really born as humans, they are living proof that it is really possible to control that kind of power. Backquote Thank you, Drake. Well, in Dracula's case, his skill should not really be a surprise. He was a knight of the Order of the Dragon after all, he stated with obviously played pride. Backquote Drake. I didn't know you had a sense of humor, Issei replied. Backquote But honestly, you could still work on it. XXX back in the real world. We are here, Rias said to him. They had arrived in front of the door and were meeting with Kiba, who was currently standing guard. Issei admitted he wasn't exactly feeling well, being here with the devils who had tried to forcefully recruit him just a few days ago. He didn't really trust them. But Gariel had offered them a deal and Rias had, as soon as she heard the offer, very quickly agreed. So far she and her entire peerage had been completely cooperative, no tricks, no manipulations. What Gariel had promised was obviously quite important to her. Has he said anything yet? Rias asked Kiba. Only if you mean throwing a lot of insults at us, then yes Bucho, Kiba replied stoically. I see, she answered. They entered the small room, Akino right behind them and Kiba still standing at the door. Freed was shackled and tied to a chair that was chained to the walls. Ironically, it was a quite similar position as his latest victim. You shit-headed devils think you are so great. He growled at them. Had it not been for your pal over there, he was looking at Issei, then I would have screwed your little girl until she could no longer stand and then cut off her fucking head. Rias slapped him across the face as she heard what he just said. Let me make one thing clear. We have all seen what you have done to Kaneko and you won't get away with this. If I had my way you would be already rotting away, right next to the human you have killed, but our temporally, allies think you might know something important. So tell me, what you know about the fallen angel group in this town, she asked him angrily. What I know is the position you will be in when I get out of here, bend over and screaming your lungs out with something hard deep inside your ass, just like so many other whores like you. Rias was backhanding him again and then even gave him a punch right in the face. She had gotten really angry now. She couldn't help herself, but this guy just set her off. Tell me, beating a chained up man, do you get off on this? Is that the thing for you devils? Freed asked her. Well, to be honest, it is my thing, Akino admitted, grinning brightly. She had been following their exchange with great interest and a more than a bit wicked smile on her face. She actually seemed to be a bit aroused, Issei thought. He wasn't quite sure about what to think about this side of Akino-senpai. He admitted it made him somewhat uncomfortable. Normally I would be the one doing the part of the interrogation, which Bucho right now so eagerly performs. She grinned. But to be honest, you are not really my type, she told him. You are too vulgar. So I will leave it to her. This time, she stated. Freed only laughed at this. Oh, I see. The lady is a perverted sadist. But she still has her standards. It is kind of amusing, don't you think? He commented. Let me deal with him, Issei said to them. Like the last time he reached out with his newly developed mental powers to the stray exorcist's mind. This time however he avoided to actually look into Freed's deranged mind. He just concentrated on forcing information out of it. The mental barriers of the stray exorcist were holding him back for a few moments. But then he focused his powers even more. As some kind of signal, a trigger for the full extent of his telepathic powers, it was something he just came up with. He snapped with his fingers, and Freed began to talk. And with every word he heard Issei became more angry. XXXXXXX Grigori headquarters at the same time Rainer was still facing her leaders. Now Rainer, tell me, what exactly do you think we should do with you? Azazel asked her. For a short moment he actually sounded a bit amused and a grin flashed across his face. But then he was dead serious again. On one side you have secured a very valuable sacred gear for our race. And you have extracted it and keeping the original owner alive. On the other you have acted without authorization, you killed a non-involved sacred gear user and you gave false information to a few of your superiors. Maybe we should reward you first and then bring you before a court-martial. What do you say? Court-martial. How can you even consider punishing her Azazel-sama? She is a hero of our race after all, Kokubile addressed him. A hero? Barakwile asked incredulous. She had murdered a 16-year-old human teenager and she had at least been planning to kill this girl too, he said, looking at Asia. A teenage boy that even Lord Azazel admitted could have become a threat, Kokubile responded, and an excommunicated nun who had, according to the reports, at least considered to betray us and defect. She would be gone and her sacred gear with her. He sends a glare to poor Asia, who was already intimidated from being here and was now actually fighting the urge to hide behind Rainer of all people. How many other lives have we already sacrificed without a second thought? Kokabeel asked them the question those answer they all already knew. Too many. Now Barakwile. You know as good as me that if we locked up everyone who killed someone for one weird reason or the other, half of the underworld would be imprisoned. Azazel commented, and the other half would be standing guard. I know that. But that doesn't mean I like it, he replied. They all knew that the fallen angels didn't have much choice when it came to their methods or to their allies. That was the only reason why people like Fried Selzen were even tolerated work for their organization. And that was also the reason that the chances of Raynor and her group actually getting a serious punishment for killing an outsider and acting without orders were pretty low. Not if people like Selzen were doing things like that and worse every week, under their protection, and were getting away with it because they were needed. No, Raynor's latest actions were only a symptom of a far greater problem. Something that needed to be changed if there should ever be a chance for true peace. How can their lower ranks be expected to show discipline and follow their orders or even to respect the lives of other races, when their leadership is letting mass murderers into their ranks and in some cases allows them to run amok? And how would this lower ranks react if one of them would get punished for something human stray exorcists get away with all the time in their organization? Punishing Raynor now would only made them all look like hypocrites. Especially with Kokabeel obviously trying to stir up trouble. You don't like it, Barakwile? Or is it more about the fact that that boy was human? Kokabeel suggested. You have a weakness for humans, haven't you? You were even married to one and had a daughter with her. What do you think my family has to do with this? Barakwile asked him angrily. Just that you had this family until someone who hated our kind decided to kill them. So the loss of human children is probably something of a wound point for you, right? But on the second though, your daughter is still alive, isn't she? Oh right, she had just abandoned you and joined the devils. She is right now with our enemies and is helping them to kill our people. How dare you? Barakwile growled. What? Telling you the truth. Your daughter is a traitor, and you are doing nothing about it, like trying to bring her back. Instead you are sitting here, trying to take the moral high ground and place judgment on people who actually care about our race. Of course if she were here, you wouldn't ask to have her punished, would you? Because you care more about humans and their offspring than your own kind. Barakwile jumped up from his seat. He looked as if he was ready to throw a light spear at his comrade. You bastard, he hissed. But Kokabeel was only sitting there, grinning. That is enough, Kokabeel, Shemhazai cut in. This is not a question of the species. Well, of course you would be saying this, given who your wife is, Kokabeel retorted, reminding them all that their vice-governor had married a devil. But at least you are leaving her influence on you in the bedroom where it belongs. Your attitude is not helping at all, Kokabeel, Penemu, who was sitting at the right end of the table, pointed out. Raynor had meanwhile been watching with shock and, to be honest, even slight amusement how her esteemed leaders were verbally ripping themselves apart. What was frustrating, however, was that Kokabeel was the only one who actually seemed to back her up. For a short moment she asked herself why she was even trying so hard to impress these people. Actually, issei, I mean the boy Raynor-sama has killed, is alive again, someone spoke up a bit timidly. They realized that it was Ossia Argento. Is he? Azazel questioned. Somehow there was a playful undertone in his voice. But it was something that only the people who knew him would realize. Yes, the fact that the boy had been returned to life was about the best part about this entire mess. And not by the devils, what would have made everything probably only more complicated in the long run. Especially now that he knew who this boy was. Raynor, he thought. Why did it had to be her of all of them who ended up pulling something like this? Oh yes, he knew exactly why. This desperate desire to prove herself to him. Her nearly obsessive need to gain his and the other leaders' attention. He was willing to bet every last one of his wings that it was Kokabeel who had placed this idea with the twilight healing into her head in the first place. But right now there was little he could do about it. Azazel knew a part of it was his own fault. He had seen the problem with her coming months ago. He could have confronted her and talked with her about it. But he had other things on his mind, and she was after all only one of many group leaders under his command. Instead he had ignored it and sent her to the mission in Kuo. Whatever you could say, telling a young woman with a borderline obsession to please him, That the sacred gear user she was meant to observe was a potential threat was clearly not one of his smartest decisions. It looks like this discussion is leading us nowhere, Azazel announced. Fighting each other will help none of us, he stated, looking at Kokabeel. If you allow me, I would like to make a suggestion. If you all agree with it, I want to take care of this matter by myself. To be precise, there is a special assignment that needs to done and Raynor here is the perfect candidate for it. This statement surprised all of them, especially Raynor herself. For a split second it crossed her mind that Azazel had maybe something else in mind to let her make up for acting outside of his orders. She wouldn't say no, she knew. Not if it was him. But what was said a moment later convinced her that this was clearly not the case. Special assignment. How come I didn't know anything about this? Penemu asked him. By her expression it was good possible that she had the same thought as Raynor did. Given that lust was a common sin under the fallen angels and Azazel's own reputation, it wouldn't even be that far off. But he proved both of them wrong instantly. It is a mission that is top secret even under the higher ranks, he answered. And I myself have only found out about this a short time ago. Besides that, for it will be necessary to remove her from the official ranks for some time. There will be neither an official reward or punishment. She will just disappear for some time. I think that would be the best for everyone involved right now. When she finished this mission successfully, then she will have fulfilled a great service to all of us. Her failings will be forgotten and she will be rewarded for all her achievements for our cause. That means, of course, if you agree to this terms, Raynor, he said. Lord Azazel, I don't know what to say. Of course I agree, she replied. Good. Meet me in my office after this meeting. I will discuss the details with you, he told her. All of them were looking at him in surprise. But none of them were against it. This would get the problem out of their hands and served, by what Azazel said, even a long-time purpose. And about you, Asia Argento, the leader of the fallen angels addressed her, as I have heard you are intending to leave our faction. Why? Yes, I do, she answered nervously. I have found people who are willing to take care of me. She interrupted herself for a short moment. Raynor Sama now possesses the twilight healing and thanks to her most other people now think I am dead, so. I see, Azazel replied. Does any one of you protest her decision to leave us? He asked. Asia was looking at the fallen angels in the room. To them she was now only a human girl, without any special powers, fighting skills or other uses. There was no longer a reason to hold her. None of them said anything. Good Asia. Then you are free to go and live wherever you want to, he told her. Thank you, Lord Azazel, she said. Kokabeel had been following the events without another word. The plan had clearly not worked out, otherwise none of these two would even be here. The only question was why. There was a reason he had made a pact with that disgusting devil in the first place, as much as he hated the thought. It was about time he contacted with his ally. XXXXXXX Kuo Academy. Rias, we need to talk, she was greeted, a short time after she and Akino had returned to their club room, by two young women in student uniforms. Both of them had dark hair, the first one in a short bob cut and both were wearing glasses. For the human students, this two were Sona Shitori, the president of the student council, and her vice president Tsubaki Shinra. Behind that, however, they were Sona Citri, the king of the other devil peerage that was controlling this area, and her queen. Yes, Sona. Rias asked her. What do you want to talk about? First of it is about this dangerous stray exorcist who you are holding prisoner, Tsubaki stated in Sona's place. I assure you that he is completely secured and he won't stay for long anyway, Rias said, looking at both of them. Besides that, the place where he is held belongs to the Grimori family alone. So it is my responsibility. I am aware of that, Sona answered. But it is not only this. There is also this agreement you have made with a group that we have never heard of before. That makes it an ideal opportunity to find out more about them, Rias countered. Don't try to fool me, Rias. I know exactly what they have offered you, she responded. By the way, while you were absent, Grafia had been trying to contact you. Grafia? What did she want? Oh, I am not quite sure. She only told me to tell you to call back, but by what she said it seems to be connected with Razor. The thin smile on Sona's face as she said this was barely to see. But Rias did notice. She knew that her friend Sona was mocking her a little. XXXXXXX Grigori headquarter Rainer followed Azazel to his personal office. If she was honest, she wasn't quite sure what to expect. Maybe he was indeed secretly happy about what she did and wanted to tell her this in private. But after all what had been said, she wasn't so sure anymore. She knew she had completely overstepped her competencies. She acted behind the back of her superiors and even killed people she was not supposed to kill. But she had acted in his best interest. Or at least that was what she was telling herself. But was that truly the case? She had a moment of doubt, or were the problems her actions caused greater than the benefit? All that, however, didn't change one single fact. She had misused his trust. As they both entered the room together, the thought once again crossed her mind that maybe he considered sex as a way to "work out" their differences. It wasn't that uncommon under the Grigori. But for some reason the thought now seemed to make her uncomfortable. Of course it was clearly not his main intention. Then he would not have been talking about a secret mission and her leaving the official ranks. But that didn't mean that he didn't maybe considered this as well. She caught herself thinking for a moment if she wasn't technically still Issei's girlfriend, and whatever sins she had committed, she didn't want unfaithfulness to be one of them. Sure, she had killed him, but he came back, and during their last meeting, he didn't exactly seem disinterested. Less than a second later she shut down the absurd thought. She was a murderer and was worried about cheating on her "boyfriend." It was not as if she had real feelings for Issei Hyodo, and even if she had, she knew about his plans to have an entire harem. So it wasn't as if he would be faithful to her. Who was she kidding? She did have such feelings, otherwise she wouldn't have such thoughts in the first place. When she had killed him, she had been cool like ice and completely businesslike. She didn't actually resented him. To be honest, she found him funny, even a bit cute, in a completely ridiculous kind of way. But of course so far beneath her that she would have never actually considered anything. But since she had heard that he came back, and had met him again, the way he was acting now, that he had practically ordered her not to harm Asia, the little bitch, that he confessed his love for her, developing feelings for a guy that you were not only planning to kill, but who you actually did kill. Stupid Rainer. Stupid, she told herself. And that enough to feel bad about the thought of a possibility that you would have jumped for a week ago. But she knew perfectly well that it wasn't really likely that Lord Azazel truly wanted that from her, at least here and now. The only one who actually confessed his love for you was the one you killed, she remembered Issei's words. But then she was brought out from her daydream by Azazel. So Rainer, you always wanted my full attention. Now you certainly have it, he said to her as he sat down. Lord Azazel, she didn't quite know what to say anymore. Say nothing. Let me see, he said to her. You think that I don't value you, that I don't appreciate you and your efforts for our cause. You think that I don't see your worth, you like I should, and don't pay enough attention to you. Well, it seems I have truly made a lot of mistakes. Isn't that right, Rainer? What? She nearly called out. She barely managed to keep her voice down. Please, it is clearly to see for everyone that you feel unappreciated, lonely and neglected. It became so bad that you even felt the need to achieve this plan behind the back of me and the entire leadership. I failed to act and give you what you needed. So all what happened is obviously my fault, right? He asked her with obvious sarcasm. Oh, of course not. How can you say something like this? She stammered. Really? Is this not how you really feel, Rainer? That I have failed you? No, of course not. You dream about becoming one of my higher officers, a member of my inner circle, maybe even more than that, he suggested, leaving it open to interpretation what he meant. Yeses, something inside Rainer shouted. But she didn't say anything. And when I didn't give you what you thought you deserved, you secretly blamed me for it. So you decided to do something radical to gain my attention, and since I could not be trusted, after all I was the one who had not seen your worth in the first place, you decided to do it all behind my back. Of course it was all for the best of our people. Since obviously you know so much better what is best for our people than I do. Isn't that how you truly feel deep down, Rainer? How could he say something like that? She asked herself. But she remembered there were times when she actually felt like this. You know, he continued, I had always considered you one of my most loyal subordinates. By far not the strongest or experienced, of course, but one of the most loyal. Sadly, it seems I was wrong. What? How can you say that? She called out. I know inside your own mind, you did this all for my sake and the sake of our race. That is maybe the saddest part of this entire mess. But a leader cannot tolerate subordinates who are acting without orders the entire time. Otherwise, he won't stay a leader for much longer. You thought having the twilight healing in the hands of a fallen would be an advantage for our race, and technically you were right. But you didn't know the whole situation. You couldn't have known. You have talent and potential, Rainer, but in many ways you are still like a child. She felt as if she had been slapped. It was like playing house with a little child. Her own words to Issei went through her head. You really left me in a difficult situation. As you saw today, Kokubile is trying to undermine the rest of the leadership. He wants nothing more than to start a new great war that could destroy us all, and now he is using you as a tool to spread dissent. If I would reward you for your actions or do nothing about it, it would encourage others to do similar things and weaken my position. Kokubile would without a doubt take advantage of this. If I would punish you, Kokubile would claim that I treat our own kind worse than the stray exorcists who are working for us, who get away with such actions all the time and use it against me as well. And that is not even everything. Do you even know who the boy is that you have killed? I have just got information a short time ago which sacred gear it is that he possesses. It is the boosted gear. He is the Red Dragon Emperor. Rainer was now just sitting there frozen in shock. Red Dragon Emperor. Issei was. To our luck, however, it doesn't seem that he is aiming for revenge against you, Azazel stated, or against the rest of us, he added. But that is the only good thing about this. So tell me, what shall I do with you? I am sorry, I didn't know. I had been told that you wanted it to happen. Yes, you did. You had been deceived. We all were. And that is your one and only excuse, he said sternly. I guess a part of it is actually my fault, he admitted. I should have made myself clearer why I wanted Issei, Hyodo observed. I should have made clear that I wanted him alive. Maybe then you wouldn't have fallen for these false orders, he commented. Listen, I have been offered an opportunity, for both of us in a way. I have recently found out about two powerful new forces that had gotten active in our areas and the one of our enemies. The first one is a dangerous terrorist organization whose trail I found some time ago and that recruits their members out of all three factions. The other one is even more mysterious. I have found out about their existence only a few days ago. But they don't seem to be hostile. In fact, they came to me and offered cooperation. Cooperation? She asked. They claim to be after this terror organization as well, and they offered to work together with us, and they have even agreed to accept members of the Grigori in their group. Rainer saw where this was going. So you want me to? Yes, I want you to join them. I want you to be my eyes and ears in this group. I want you to help them fight the terror organization that is a threat to all of us. But at the same time, I want you to find out all about them what you can. But that, Rainer stated. They have agreed to let you contact me regularly and give a status report, and they agreed to give me all information about their organization that is not considered top secret. But only under the condition that we work together. I won't sugarcoat it, Rainer. This mission is extremely dangerous. We know barely anything about this people. There is no guarantee that they are truly as benevolent as they claim, and even then you will fight against terrorists with people we barely know. You will fight with them, work with them, fight with them, but unofficially you will still be a member of the Grigori. You are also free to bring the other members of your team with you if you think it is the right decision. If you refuse, I will just restore you to your old position and give you a new post. You will not be officially punished. But you will not be rewarded either, and you will stay there and won't get any sort of promotion for the foreseeable future. Placed at the sidelines, that was the human term, Rainer thought. I see. So you are sending me off because I became deadweight to you anyway, she stated bitterly. You know the situation, Rainer. I wish it was different. Maybe in time I would give you another task to win back my trust. But as it is now, this is your chance. If you succeed, you will be promoted to the higher ranks, and as promised, your mistakes will be forgotten. Yes, and like I already said, I accept, she answered. Good, because as it seems the representative of our new allies just arrived, Azazel stated a second later. A magic circle appeared on the ground before them and the fallen angel Raynor knew as Gariel appeared in the room. You have arrived, he greeted her. Azazel, has everything worked out? She asked him. It indeed did, he said. Ossia Argento is not longer part of our faction and Raynor here has agreed to temporarily join your group. Her group. But I thought she was working for you. Raynor questioned. You have tricked me. She realized, accusing Gariel. Well, that was maybe what she has told you, but in fact I have never met her until 2 days ago, Azazel commented. Yes, I have tricked you, just like you have tricked Issei, she reminded her. But I did it with the best intentions. After all, you now have the twilight healing, just like you wanted and you didn't need to kill Asia for it. Raynor didn't say anything. Raynor, Azazel addressed her, one last thing. This entire plan to take Ossia Argento's sacred gear, is it possible that it has originally not been your idea? That someone else had brought it up? Yes, she answered after a short hesitation. Was it Kokabeel? Quote. Yes, she replied once again. I see, Azazel stated. Just like killing Hyodo then, he said quietly. XXXXXXX. A few minutes later the three of them, Raynor, Asia and Gariel, had teleported back to Kuo. For Raynor it was right the next shock as she saw who was awaiting them as the town border. Issei Hyodo was standing there, waiting for them. You, she called out, looking from him to Gariel and back, you two are working together. She also remembered the shock as she found out what kind of sacred gear Issei possessed. Yes, does that really surprise you? Gariel asked. As it seems we are all on the same team now. She grinned. Raynor barely held back a growl as she began to realize how far she had been duped. As she looked at Issei however, his eyes seemed to avoid her. Does that really surprise you? She asked herself. You have killed him. Asia meanwhile was running towards him. Issei. It has worked. I am free now. I can live wherever I want, she told him. That is good. He laid his arms around her. Do you still want me to live with your family? She asked. Of course. Seeing the entire scene, Raynor could once again feel the burning rage coming up inside her. A part of her actually regretted not killing Asia. There was no sense to longer deny it, she actually was jealous. XXXXXXX. A few hours later it was at the same afternoon that Issei, Gariel, Raynor and Asia were meeting again with Rias Peerage, who had freed with them. They had teleported to a small forest area, a few miles outside of the town, where they had agreed to meet with Rias and the others. Asia was with them, but she was looking completely different from before. She had her hair dyed in a brown color and was wearing it in a ponytail, with 2 loose strands at both sides of her face. Which made her only look even cuter in Issei's opinion. Her nun outfit had she switched against regular clothes and for this day, she was wearing glasses. Gariel had also used a technique to mask the fact that she actually still possessed the Twilight Healing and that Raynor's version was a copy. They had by now introduced Asia to Issei's parents. Like Issei had already planned, he told them the story how he had found her in the town and asked them if she could stay with them for a while. Given how Issei knew his parents and that they sometimes talked about how it would be to have a daughter, he knew there was a good chance that a while would turn into permanently very soon. This is Maya, he introduced Asia to the devils under her false name. None of them would know who she truly was. This was also a test how good Asia's disguise worked in extreme situations. If she needed to have a normal life in Kuo, she needed to be able to fool devils and maybe even exorcists, at least over a short time. You have brought him here. Issei stated towards Rias. Yes, she replied. We will meet with the agents of the church very soon and hand him over. At her sign Kiba and Akano brought Freed closer who was still in chains. Oh look who we have here, the captured stray exorcist exclaimed, the shitty devils, the sacred gear boy, Raynor and another fallen angel, all together and a little girl. He was looking at Asia a bit longer than at the other. But he wasn't saying anything. For the moment. Are we all collaborating with the enemy now? He asked them and grinned. You of all people have nerve to say that Selzen, Issei stated. Did you bring anything out of him? Gariel asked him. You can say that, he replied. So Freed, Why don't you tell them exactly what you have told me? For a split second the stray exorcist was looking at him in visible rage. Now, since you have already brought me to spill the beans to you, by the way, an interesting technique, I will make sure to repay you someday, bastard, he said with open malice. Well, I guess it can't hurt to tell you all the whole story once again, right? XXXXXXX Grigori headquarters. The meeting between the leaders of the fallen angel faction had just come to its end. Ultimately nothing had been decided. Just like Kokobile had intended. Azazel, however, seemed to have his own plans for little Rainer. It didn't matter, he thought. She was no longer truly his concern. There were enough others who could take her place. He created a magic circle and transported himself to a place in a safe distance from the headquarters, where he would not be overheard. Another circle appeared close to him, a smaller one meant for communication. Kokobile, I have been expecting to hear from you, a voice greeted him. I can imagine. Tell me, what has happened? We have you not attacked like it was our plan? He asked the voice. Yes, why? That is a good question, he responded. Let us say things were not exactly like they were supposed to be. For once another fallen angel had arrived that you didn't have informed me about. One more would hardly be a problem, Kokobile countered. Your forces would still outnumber them. And there was also that little Asia actually survived the ritual, the voice commented. That was not what we agreed to. She was meant to die, so that I can bring her back and be her savior. This was not what we agreed to. Asia was meant to belong to me and in exchange I would leave her sacred gear to you. That was our deal, right? But with this new fallen showing up, who said that I could still trust you? Maybe it was instead meant to be a trap for me. Coward, Kokobile thought. Of course someone like him would only act if the situation was absolutely in his favor. Listen, Diodora, he said, it is not possible to control a situation completely. This other fallen was sent by Azazel, I had no say in that. But it still could have worked out if you haven't hesitated. Now both Asia and Argento and the Twilight Healing are out of our hands. Yes, it seems the plan has failed, the devil replied. It is really sad. Well, I will find her again and try anew. Then do that by yourself, Kokobile stated angrily. I have other matters to deal with. If you say so. I wish you good luck with your plans, Kokobile, he said and ended the communication. Idiot, the fallen angel thought. Normally a fallen angel general like Kokobile and Diodora Astaroth, a high-class devil from a prestigious family, would have never come to see eye to eye with each other, if it were not for a certain organization that they were both part of, even in different arms. But that didn't mean that they trusted or liked each other. Sacred gear. The truth was that Kokobile had never any real interest in the Twilight Healing. Actually, he fully expected his partner to betray him and keep both it and Ossia Argento for himself. This was what a devil would do after all. No, he intended him and his servants to attack their base and very likely kill Rainer and the rest of her team. That was why he had placed the idea with the Twilight Healing inside her head and gave that devil her and Asia's location and the date when the extraction ritual would take place. Then he could use this attack to stir up the Grigori leadership even more to his course of war. If Diodora had decided to keep the Twilight Healing for himself, he could have even accused him of starting the entire attack just for stealing the sacred gear in the first place. Rainer and her comrades. Their role had from the beginning been the one of martyrs for his cause. But as things were now, this wouldn't work out anymore. But maybe he could still do something with the rest of her team. XXXXXXX outside of Kuo, so you see, it had all been planned from the very beginning. Diodora. He had actually injured himself, just to get little Asia kicked out of the church. He has this thing for nuns, you know. He just loves turning them into his playthings. You see him and Kokobile, they are both in the same organization. So they made a deal. My role. Well, I was sent here to heat up things a little. To make sure everything goes smoothly. You know, killing people, attacking a few devils. Good old Kokobile wants nothing more than to start a war, you know. And you, Rainer, and your little team, I fear you were only set up to be killed off from the start. He laughed. He just wanted you to die for him the entire time, he announced. Rainer was just standing there, staring at him like frozen. Then she was looking at Issei and back. She looked down and seemed to whisper something quietly. Most of them didn't understand it. But Issei, who had moved closer to her, did. Will you die for me? He heard the words she had repeated. Rainer couldn't take it anymore. After the words she had gotten from Azazel, after finding out about Issei's sacred gear, this was just too much. She couldn't say anything and just turned around and walked away quickly. She could barely keep herself from running, but she didn't want to humiliate herself even more in front of them. What's with her? Fried asked mockingly as he saw her leave. I guess some people can't take the truth, he stated. Oh, and little Asia, her rescuer, would have quickly turned her into a sex toy. Diodora really knows how to break them in. Even I am impressed here. He would for sure have much fun with her. She was such a cute little thing. Who knows, if I had asked nicely, maybe he would let me have a turn too. But too bad that won't happen now because she is dead, right? Right? He asked in Issei's direction. As he said this, Asia walked forward, until she was standing right in front of him, and without saying a word, kneeled him right in the crotch. Ah! Fried called out in pain. You little bitch, he howled. I will get you for this. I know about you. Rias and the other devils were only smiling. Issei, however, was looking with an open mouth at Asia as he saw what she had just done. He could not believe it. He was staring at her for a few seconds, before he turned around and left. XXX, a part of him truly questioned why he was doing this. Why? Why was he going after Rainer? He found her about a minute later. She was leaning with her back against a tree, and it looked as if she had tears in her eyes. Issei, she said as she saw him. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I am such a bitch. He could hardly disagree here, he thought. But he didn't say anything. Despite what she did to him, after hearing Fried's story twice now, he could not help to feel somewhat sorry for her. He saw that she was indeed crying. Issei, forgive me, please, she said between sobs. He wanted to say something, but he didn't bring a word out. He saw that his hands were shaking. She realized it as well. I see. I must have really hurt you. Like hell you did, he replied with a sudden burst of anger. I am sorry. Will you at least allow me to make it up to you? Will you give me a chance? I know now how you must feel. He nodded. Thank you, she said. We have to return to the others. Are you coming? He asked in a grim tone and wanted to turn around. Issei, could you not tell anybody that you have seen me like this? She pleaded. Of course, he answered. Thank you. XXXXXXX. The place where they were meeting with the church agents was once again a few miles further away from the town. They had arrived at the agreed place and were waiting. After around 10 minutes they saw two figures appearing and coming closer. Both of them were wearing blue robes and had hood over their heads, and they could feel holy energy radiating from them. Exorcists. As they had arrived and were standing only a few meters away, they could see that both of them were young girls. Issei, one of the two figures, called out to everyone's surprise as she saw them. She lifted her hood and they could see that it was a girl with light brown orange-colored hair that she was wearing in twin ponytails. The girl stepped closer to him and wrapped her arms around him. Issei, it is me, Irina, she told him. He could feel both Asia and Rainer stare at him.